Thank you, I appreciate it.
All it is a card that says it's.
I don't think there's an issue.
I just seen another one. I didn't read all of this, but I can do that one.
It's not a problem.
I'm sorry, I had another question. You said if you wanted to give something to them, they had somebody that can talk to you.
Oh, you can just give it to one of us. Yeah.
Oh, the text, no. I'm talking about the pattern. I mean, when the motion, when the
That it's gonna be on the.
Tuesday is going to include the battle. That was the thing, not the language. I get your point. We use it for this thing, yeah, we can do that. It's the, and the battle is when you did this one, too.
That's mine. I'll let you know.
But then it'll be too much.
I don't know if that makes you feel better.
It's true. It's true. Make us-
And I'll put it up to it. She wants you to.
Okay, thank you.
I think it is your next one.
I'm protecting you.
staff really searched for a long time. None of us liked that we were on that Tuesday, which we put you with a lot of other meetings. So now we're back to Thursday. And we have also added some 3 Saturdays on the agenda so that we can hopefully extend the opportunity for more people who have time on the weekend to come and participate from the community. I'd like to start like we usually do, with just a kind of a minute meditation. We traveled to get here, had our breakfast, got our coffee, we drove, and now we're going to join together and just hoping to do some good connection and communication today. So when I ring the bell, I invite you all to just feel your feet on the ground, take some deep breaths.
Point of order. Do you intend on doing the Pledge of Allegiance?
We'll get to that.
Okay,
Would you mind
I'm just asking, sure.
letting me run the meeting, thank you. As I said, just take a moment, come together, deep breath. I'd like to extend our condolences to the department for the tragic loss of life of Detective Amber Least. It was a terrible accident, and I know this is a loss to the LASD family and her whole family, so we send our condolences. And now we do have the if everyone please stand if you can.
Please repeat with me the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So a little bit about St. Anne's, where we are today. This is, St. Anne's has been around for several decades, and it's a haven for vulnerable pregnant women, dedicated to providing services to their families and children in need. They also have a school here on their campus, and housing for young mothers. They do counseling, parenting classes, and workforce development. And as we are guests in this space, I want to ask everyone, please treat this space with the respect that it deserves. People do live here. People work here. People do live here. So before we move on with the agenda, I would just like to review a few of the things that we did discuss at the December meeting. That's our meeting that we usually do take a little time to check in about some of the significant items that we worked on. And you can see the list on the screen. The harassment of families, the Brady List resolution, inmate welfare fund, Mira Loma Women's Detention Center, the Fort Apache East LA Station logo, internal administrative investigations, secret deputy subgroups, immigration policy, and right now the commission is conducting a 3-year review that's been instituted by the Board of Supervisors with an outside firm. So it's 3 years that we've been 2020 to continue the critical work that we do to provide oversight, to encourage transparency and trust and engagement. Some of the things that we're going to be looking at is encouraging the sheriff to release the Grady list, recruitment, transparency, the deputy subgroups, the inmate welfare fund, then central jail, internal discipline and use of force, and of course we continue to oversight PREA and the new family assistance program that is still in its formative stages, so we'll be hearing more about the progress of those two very important projects that the LASD is conducting. So we have a lot to tackle, and we're looking forward to a very productive year. We're going to turn to, any commissioners have any comments about what we did at that meeting? So we want to approve the minutes of December 17th, 2019. Thank you. Any public discussion or comments?
We have one. Greg Allen.
Good morning. My comment about the minutes were regarding public comment. Public comment, we come and ask questions. We really don't get any answers. I would like your minutes to include the questions that public comment has. And then if possible, the year forward, you could at least address some of those questions that you feel pertinent in writing, so that we can feel we're getting something back from you. Some of the questions we've asked is, why were those 8 other sheriffs beaten up by other sheriffs? That doesn't sound good to me. I want to know what's happened to that. I didn't get an answer from that. Nobody seems to be concerned to tell me about it. So if we can answer the questions that public comments presents, just something, then I'll feel like you're listening. Good to see you again, Mr. Bonner. We missed you. We see there's these crimes that he wrote a letter about that we wanted to be excluded from changing from a felony to a misdemeanor. And I'd like to know what happened with that. Are we still changing those crimes down to misdemeanors? Are we going to be able to just offer a bribe to our sheriffs and it only be a misdemeanor? Because that's not good. Okay. So let's talk about what you guys done in the year. I have a guy who came up here. His name's Keith Harding. He mentioned 24 murders up in my neighborhood, up in Angeles Crest, La Cañada area. And then he said that 22 MS-13 people were arrested, and 19 of them were undocumented. I'd like to ask a question. How many of those 19 undocumented criminals were in your jail system and you let them loose on our streets to murder people? Thank you.
Thank you. We have a motion, we have a vote to adopt the minutes, approve the minutes. Everyone in favor? Any opposition? Okay, minutes are approved. So agenda item number 2, we're going to have a presentation from the Office of Inspector General regarding the Sheriff's compliance with the Memorandum of Understanding governing the exchange of information. One of the primary objectives of our work is to improve transparency with respect to the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. And so we do require timely exchange, encourage, require, and expect timely exchange of pertinent information from the department. And we have to rely on the Office of Inspector General to get that information and share it with the commission. So we've asked Mr. Huntsman to give us a presentation on that continued matter of concern.
Good morning. I have a slide up here to talk about some examples of information that was requested and not received, since that's what was asked for at the the last meeting. However, the board has voted to modify the ordinance, and as you'll see, this is compliance with the county code, the Inspector General ordinance, not MOU or MOA. We had an MOA with the previous sheriff. Don't have one with this sheriff. In December, when this sheriff was elected, I sent a letter making some requests. It was completely ignored, and that was an abrogation of the MOA. So the MOA has no applicability anyway. It is not being complied with. And the question is the county code being complied with? The answer is no. But it's now going to be changed. I don't expect additional compliance, but I do think ultimately we will come to this board and ask for a subpoena related to one of those items that we don't receive compliance in. I may be surprised. And then we'll end up in litigation on some of these issues. But that's further down the road. For now, I just want to document some of these things since it was asked by commissioners at the last meeting. Well, oh, sorry. By the way, all this stuff relates, this is a list of sort of the areas in which we haven't gotten cooperation. All of this relates to some primary problems with the management of the Sheriff's Department. And I don't mean this sheriff, I mean the Sheriff's Department for the past 50 years. The Sheriff's Department tends to be decentralized in the way it's managed and very secretive. And as a result, there have been certain negative outcomes. Secret societies or deputy gangs are one of them. Also the internal discipline. There was a recent Times editorial about the internal discipline system being a shambles. That was actually a plank that the current sheriff ran on, although I disagree with him with the reason for why the discipline system is a shambles. I agree that it is a shambles. And then, of course, transparency is the secrecy part. The Sheriff's Department has always operated in a very secretive manner, and oversight is in part about trying to lift that veil back so that people, both yourselves who are members of government, I know you don't think of yourself that way because you're volunteers, but guess what, you are now, as well as members of the public who want to know things can actually learn them. And that's a critical part. So I don't think it's a coincidence that we have secret societies, that a lot of the information we're gathering is about trying to get rid of secret societies, and we're being met with secrecy in response to it. And it also dovetails with the harassment requests that this commission made last meeting, and we'll talk about it maybe the meeting before. Internal discipline to start with. This is in October of 2018, before the sheriff was in office, we made a request for full access to PRMS. PRMS is a computer system that the Sheriff's Department runs that tracks all its internal discipline. We learned in the second half of 2018 that we had been excluded from viewing certain files within the system, and that those files had been designated private to IAB, so that when we looked at the system, those files didn't even show up. So our statistics were wrong, our understanding of what was happening was wrong, and certain specified cases were concealed from us. We sent a letter to the sheriff at that time and said we wanted to be able to see these invisible cases. We wanted to be able to have the full access that the MOA that was enforced at that time provided for, which is the executive level access and not a limited access. We didn't get an immediate response, but around the time that the sheriff was leaving, he did give us copies of some of those files. He did not give us the access we asked for so that we could see what was actually being hidden, but he gave us a set of copies of files, and that's what my office is currently being criminally investigated for by the current sheriff. Needless to say, the sheriff has never complied with this request either, has not given us access to that computer system. In fact, our access to the computer system has been throttled back so that we can only look at it on site with somebody observing what we're doing, and we do not get that access to those secret files. We have since had some of those files placed by the department on a shared server so that we can access the same ones that I allegedly stole under the previous administration have actually been provided to us by this administration. But again, it's not access itself so that we can see what's hidden now. It's a set of files that we identified that they say, okay, well, here are those files. So we have no ability to check on what is being kept secret from the decision makers within the department. And on at least one occasion, the discipline system in operation, one of those secret files was relevant to a decision made by the department, and the decision makers weren't aware of it because of that secrecy. In December, once the new sheriff had come in, we sent a letter requesting access. I'm sorry, we haven't get to that yet. This is still on internal discipline. February 13, 2019, this is a request that we made to the sheriff because the sheriff had been announcing publicly that there were a large number of deputies who had been wrongfully fired and he was going to get them their jobs back. On this particular occasion, you referred to 6 specific cases of, I think, low-hanging fruit is the term you used, cases that need to be reversed. So we were concerned about the discipline system. We sent a letter requesting the names and identities of the files so that we could look at them and see if there was indeed evidence to support this statement. And we received no response to that letter ever, then, now, or at any time. Now I want to talk about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This again relates to not just the discipline system, hiring as well, because there was the rehiring of Deputy Mandoyan, but also secret societies. Deputy Mandoyan was alleged in all that to be a Grim Reaper and to have used his Reaper status to intimidate a fellow deputy, which, by the way, Mr. Allen had inquired about the status of the beatdown of several deputies by the Banditos some time ago, and the answer is we don't know. It's all secret. The Sheriff's Department knows, but we don't.
About the woman from Mandela.
Like I said, I gave you one vote. You get one vote. But that case is still pending and nobody's forgotten. Rand is doing a study on it. The Sheriff's Department, we're going to talk in a minute about the policy issues related, and OIG has been asked by this body to investigate. That's why we have a change in the law. When you asked me to investigate, I said, you know, my ordinance doesn't allow me to, and I asked for a new ordinance. We've got it now coming Tuesday. I think the board's voting on it. So we will definitely move forward on that. But as to Mandoyan, we again requested specifically in December that the sheriff provide us a bunch of things. Policies, as the policies were being changed, because that's the means by which the sheriff directs the department what to do. Absolutely critical that the OIG be included in the process of policy making. They don't have to do anything we suggest, quite the opposite. I've always shared my opinion with the department whenever asked, simply so they don't get surprised, but they don't have to listen to me. I just make a public report, so they can write whatever they want, and I let them know, you know, I'm going to write a report saying that's a problem, if it's a problem, or I'm going to say it's good. They didn't do that at all. And we also asked that they update us on the status of the Truth and Reconciliation process. That was the Mandoyan rehiring. Not a word, nothing given to us. After it occurred, we attempted to inquire into how the process worked. Here's an email that we sent, this one in January, of asking to interview the sheriff personally about the process. Here's the email we got in response in March in which they canceled the interview. Here we have February, I think this one we already talked about. This is a February 13th, I have it in here twice, I apologize for that. The February 13th letter we sent asking about the particular files the sheriff had said were improper, and we got no response from that whatsoever. And again, that's to the current day. We've heard nothing about that. This is a report statement we made about this. Again, this is the question was, you know, where have we been denied information? If you want to look at that, in addition to what I'm presenting, you can just go look at our public reports. Our Mandoyan report documents a number of ways in which we were denied information regarding that inquiry. And in this particular case, you'll see that footnote 139 refers to an exhibit we attached to that report. And it's still public, available to anybody who wants to look at it. And this is the next 2 slides. As you'll see, there's a whole bunch of items that we requested to try to figure out what the heck happened. No response from the department on any of them to this day. We did get as you all know, a response from the department, which was a document which has an elaborate discussion of alleged facts that reads as though it was written by a civil lawyer for civil litigation. It does not in any way address the things we actually said in our report or our requests for information. It doesn't supply that information or do anything, and it ignores the key points in the Mandoyan case, which are that there are audio and videotapes that are completely inconsistent with the audio taped statements of the defendant, or not defendant, deputy who then got fired. And that's the problem. That's the dishonesty element that's at its core with that case, and nothing in any of that ever addresses that, nor do they ever answer any of the questions regarding it. Now hiring. And hiring is critical because deputy gangs form, in part, the Rampart case, right, we're all familiar with that one. Rafael Perez was a gangbanger before he became a cop. And his hiring was fundamentally a mistake. And then there was a lack of supervision that allowed a bunch of horrible things to happen. That's not as much what goes on in the Sheriff's Department with deputy gangs and secret societies. It's much more something that's unique to the organization that people get indoctrinated in once they join. at least as far as I know. It's a large organization, so I'm sure there's exceptions. But nonetheless, the hiring process is critical. We need to be careful who we hire, and we need to carefully evaluate them. So, as we have with the past administrations, we asked to look at packets, hiring packets, so that we could evaluate whether or not standards are going to be relaxed. And the Sheriff's Department has told us that standards are being relaxed. In the same sentence, they've said we're not relaxing standards, but then they said we've cut way back on the questions we ask in the polygraph, and we've streamlined the whole process, so the background check is very quick. But in the polygraph, where they used to actually explore some of the important issues about whether a person is honest and forthright, they now don't. They only ask a subset of questions that deal with the sort of are you qualified level. So the example I think they gave when presenting was if you're not allowed to have more than 3 times you smoked a marijuana cigarette, they ask if you smoked more than 3 marijuana cigarettes. They don't ask about your drug use or so on and so forth. And I'm making that up. I'm not telling you that's the standard, because the standard is also a secret. So anyway, we sent an email back in May saying we'd like to monitor the process as we've done in the past. We'd like to look at these packets so that we can form an independent opinion about whether or not you've opened the floodgates and are just letting people in, or if this is a careful process, and asked to see them in June. As you know from this discussion being had publicly, the Sheriff's Department refused to let us do that. Ultimately, they have taken a position contrary to what they've been advised by County Council, that we cannot lawfully look at it because of medical information. We've learned since then that, in fact, there is no medical information in there. There's a letter from a doctor saying, yeah, this person can be a deputy sheriff, but they don't have their medical records from the hospital in there. It wasn't a problem in previous administrations. It's not one in this one. But yet still the legal issue has been raised, and the sheriff has said he wants a third opinion. He doesn't want to listen to County Council. He wants somebody else to tell him. So that's, I think, something we're going to have to litigate down the road. But I mentioned that one of the points they made is they talked about a HIPAA waiver. And they said, well, we can't give it to you because we got a HIPAA waiver that is only the Sheriff's Department. Now, as you know from the Mandoyan litigation, the court has ruled that the Sheriff's Department is just part of the county. There isn't a separate Sheriff's Department from the county. The county is the employer of all deputy sheriffs. And if you waive your medical secrecy to the Sheriff's Department, you waive it to the county, of which I am a part. And as you know by my ordinance, I am not allowed to share confidential information with anybody. Again, there isn't any in these files, but if there was. So we asked for the waiver. We sent a request back in November for the waiver, and we received nothing. So in the same way that initially there's a public presentation to the board that there was medical records here that they didn't want us to look at because of privacy, and now it turns out there aren't. I kind of wonder, is there a waiver? What does the waiver say? Does it really say just the Sheriff's Department and not Max? I kind of wonder, since it hasn't been provided. Now, transparency itself. We have a lot of sources. And one of our sources told us that the Sheriff's Department management had sent out emails accusing the Office of Inspector General of conducting an unlawful investigation, of doing a number of things, and telling people to throttle back on what they told us and to run everything through the Sheriff's Office. So we don't want to burn our sources, so we asked for the independent evidence. We sent an email requesting back in June that they give us communications sent down to the department about how they should work with the OIG. And we're certainly entitled to. Zero response to that. Never got them. Never even got told, well, we're not going to give it to you. Harassment, and again, secret societies. And I mention secret societies because a big part of these harassment allegations are out of East Los Angeles, where the sheriff himself has announced that the Bandidos, at least at one point, effectively ran that station. And I don't like to call deputy secret societies gangs, because I think that's an open factual question as to individual groups. There are a lot of these secret societies in the Sheriff's Department. I am of the opinion that the mere secrecy of them is fatal to the honesty of the Sheriff's Department for a bunch of reasons that I think I've gone into before and will be happy to talk about again. But the question of whether or not they're gangs matters to the folks out there. They care a lot. And the Bandidos, I think, pretty clearly are a gang from the conduct that happened in that beatdown of fellow deputies. But in any event, that's ground central for these harassment allegations. So it's important. And you yourselves asked the Sheriff's Department conduct an investigation of the harassment allegations, not a spot issue, but of the larger issue. And the way I heard it, there was a refusal. we sent an email making some requests. We requested that they conduct such an investigation. We secondarily attached a letter that had been received from the ACLU and Black Lives Matter and other groups detailing some of these. We also asked that they update us in real time as they go along. And this is all, I've given you documentation, because the question is, when the department tells you, oh yeah, we're giving the OIG everything they asked for, and I tell you they're not, you don't know who's telling you the truth. So I'm providing you actual evidence, and they can now provide you the written response where they actually gave us all these things, if I'm incorrect. So that's the purpose of this. But there's been a lot of oral interaction as well. And the change from a year ago or 2 years ago now to now is drastic in terms of the oral interaction and the throttle back of the information we're given. And finally, we requested, again, the same thing we requested back in December, the text of changes being proposed to policies. And as you'll see a little later on when I get to the Times editorial, it's actually really important. We didn't ask for that by random coincidence. As you can see from behind us, it's a pretty short request. So, we targeted what we were asking for. So it wasn't a mistake that we put that in. And here's the response. They gave us some stuff. They gave us a bunch of complaints that had been filed and that they've looked at. And I'll talk about that when I talk about the harassment allegations. But for the most part, as to these things relating to policies and whatnot, they said, I'm sorry, that's overly broad. And I'm sorry that complying with 832.7 of the Penal Code, which requires that after every shooting, the video that they have of the shooting be put out immediately, unless there's a written explanation given for why it would interfere with an investigation. That's the law in California, and the Sheriff's Department doesn't comply with it at all, except in one case where they put out the video of a particular shooting, the Twyman shooting. So that's the current state, is that law is not being complied with. So I shouldn't take offense, I suppose, that the law that says they're supposed to give stuff to me is also not being complied with, but it's personal to me because this is my job, so I do care about that. But both are not being complied with, and they're laws. So the idea that it's overly broad, sorry, you have 20,000 people working for you, you need to do this. And again, this is exactly what I asked for back in December. When you're going to write a policy, you put them out there, share with us what's going on. And you're going to see in a moment why that's really important. If you don't know, I think you do, because you've made the same request. You asked for it on body cameras. You said, share your policy with us as you draft it, so that we can weigh in, we can have the public weigh in, and you can get our input in the process. And you have a draft policy now that I think you'll see there are some issues in it. Although, not to be coy about it, my advice is move forward on body cameras, regardless of what the policy says. And I'll go into later why that's important. Here's an example of why it's important. This is one of the letters. I've been receiving these for a while now. I get them from the undersheriff telling me why I'm wrong about everything I say. And they go through in detail. They don't actually address what I say, but they have sort of arguments, again, that read as though they were written by somebody for a civil court about why I'm wrong. And I pulled this one particular one out because it's interesting. It refers to policy 301.050.83. I met with the sheriff personally back in December, and I told him, there's a way you can be a hero in all this. Deputy gangs have got to go, and it's going to happen. It's become so public and so aware that it's just not going to be tolerated anymore. I can predict the future, that in time, it's going to be gone. The First Amendment argument, no. The FBI and the CIA do not have to have Al-Qaeda members in them. The Sheriff's Department does not have to have gang members within it. The First Amendment does not protect that idea. Well, let's suppose it did. I said, Sheriff, you can write an ordinance today, a policy that solves this problem by saying people can't be part of a secret organization that violates the rights of others. And if you say that, I realize that's not all-inclusive. That gives us the right and duty to ask what's going on, so you remove the veil of secrecy. And if we find out what's going on is you're beating up fellow deputies or members of the community, okay, that group's no good. Sheriff did nothing out of that until he proposed an ordinance to you guys, or a policy in April-ish that didn't say that at all. And then in July or August, he presented to the media, out of the blue, without any kind of consultation or anything, an announcement that he had a new policy that said essentially that. It's actually not a bad policy. It says you can't be part of an organization that violates the rights of others, and some other things. It's not actually a policy. He just said it and proposed it, and it's not a policy. So even though I received this letter talking about this policy. The policy, I don't believe exists. It's a proposal of something that may become a policy. And that's important because the Times wrote an editorial not long ago, December 30th, in which they said a bunch of things. It's primarily about the discipline system. But one of the things they talked about in it is this issue. I'll get to it in. What they talked about is they mentioned that Villanueva put an end to discipline investigations of dozens of deputies. That's a report that I made publicly to you about the closing of IA cases. It happened. It's an absolute fact. Here's where we discussed it in our public report. This body specifically asked the department to have some of the chiefs who had closed these cases come and explain the process, not to give up their secrets about what happened in an individual case, but to explain what is going on. And the department refused. Now, I don't have a document to demonstrate that, but you have the minutes of your records, and so you are aware that this happened. So when we talk about denial of access, it's not just me, it's you who have been denied access. And this is a critical point, these closing of IA cases. The Times said it, and it was the truth. The sheriff put out a tweet, only the truth, in which he quotes that statement. That statement is an absolute fact regarding a report that we publicly made that the department was put on notice 100% about because you asked to talk to the chiefs about it and were given a no publicly. But the response is this rambling paragraph, which talks about great things he does, doesn't address the question, but in it, it talks about how he's introduced a policy to ban the formation of subgroups and cliques. So, as we discussed, I've already been given the number of this policy by the undersheriff, and here's where I'll give the sheriff some credit. Now in the sheriff's department, unlike in the past, they have put up their policies and some of their manuals on their website. That's good. So as a result, I can say to you the thing that otherwise would be a secret. I went and ran that policy, and this is exactly where it would fall. Right in that section, after grooming and dress standards. It's not there. There's no such policy. We checked with the department, they said it's in negotiation with the unions. Let's back up. Here's the letter I get from the undersheriff. Policy 3-01050.83 agreed upon by the unions. And that was back in what, July or August, where I was being upbraided for the misinformation I was sharing. Several months have gone by, still not a policy. And yet the Times is being told that they're putting out misinformation based on this policy that doesn't exist. And in response to a question that had nothing to do with the policy, it had to do with the closing of IA cases. So this is why it matters. This is why transparency matters. Because as an elected official, the sheriff is going to make public statements left and right, and they're going to be done in the form of aggressive, only the truth kind of quotes. He's going to criminally investigate people who criticize him, such as myself. When I went to the board and said that I wasn't getting access, that's the August report you already saw, and as you see, these are the documents, and we don't have these things. The Sheriff's Department has publicly said we're not letting you look at the hiring packets. When I said that, he put out a tweet saying, facts matter. Mr. Huntsman knows he has full access to LASD HQ right now. It's not true. And if you don't have transparency, then the public's not in a position to know what's the truth and what's not the truth. And I don't mean to beat up on one guy, because this is not a one-guy problem. Whoever sits in that chair will be pushed towards saying things that are not accurate, either spinning things a bit or doing whatever. Jim McDonald put out tweets through his PR arm about how he was only releasing serious and violent felons. He said serious and violent criminals. Well, serious and violent are terms of art that refer to felons, a subset of felons. Serious and violent felonies. And so I wrote a report about that. He did not appreciate that at all. It isn't because he was a problem. It isn't because Alex Villanueva is a problem. It's built into the machine. And if you don't have transparency, the guy at the top will always be pushed to spin things a little bit. And if he doesn't, he'll get voted out, because that's how politics works, right? We all watch it on the national stage all the time. We see the screaming heads talking to each other and the spinning of facts. Well, it happens here too, and it's important that a law enforcement official be held to a higher standard, that they be required to speak only the truth, because law enforcement needs to be truthful for the public to trust it. And in order to ensure that that happens, you need complete transparency. That means there has to be an insider who doesn't spill the beans, who gets to see everything. There needs to be a commission that gets to see not everything, but a lot of stuff in order to get a different point of view. Because even I was a prosecutor for 20 years. I'm an insider. You folks, some of you are, some of you aren't. You're a broader group. And then you have these folks who show up, who tell you their opinion, and we ultimately have the press who shares with the public what happens, and then they tell us their opinion. And that is critical to having good law enforcement. As body cameras are critical, we're going to talk about it in a minute, as thorough investigations of allegations of harassment are critical, especially when they come out of Secret Society Central, East Los Angeles. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Huntsman. There was a lot there. A lot for us to digest. Before I open it up for the commissioners to have some questions, I have one question, and perhaps Sheriff can answer this. Maybe you're thinking this question too. What makes a policy a policy? Like we have this, we know some of how laws are made in the state government, federal government. Things get written down, they get codified, they're disseminated, they're easily accessible. So could you let us know how that works at LASD?
Would you mind if I responded to what was said earlier real quick?
Sure.
So what I heard from Mr. Huntsman was that he's now officially out of the MOAS, and he's an announcement for us, and we'll take that into consideration.
Sir, could you please speak closer into the microphone?
So what I've heard today is Mr. Huntsman announced that he is out of the MOA, which is news to us, and we'll take that into consideration. And then what I also heard today was him openly accusing the LASD of not following the law. I openly heard him talking that the sheriff is been lying to him and presenting this as a prosecutor. So I don't have counsel with me here today, but I won't be able to comment any further if we're being accused of violating the law, so I'm going to have to come back with counsel to be able to further address any of those allegations, unfortunately. I would tell you that I personally had high hopes for this year. I think this is a tough way for us to start out. As I told you in December, I came here to really try to work with you and improve relationships, and that's what I was sent here to do, to be transparent with you, to give you everything you needed and have open dialogue. And it's really troubling for me to sit here and be accused of those type of things and then try to have dialogue and to listen to the public who's come here to tell me things and to take back with the organization and not be able to comment on what we're accused of. But I was a detective for a long time, and I know when we're being accused. So I'm not an attorney, but I'm going to need to consult with one on those issues when we're being openly accused as if we're in a court of law and we're being prosecuted. I don't know that that's what this forum is actually for. We're all in the same county. We're all trying to better the department, work with the community, have good community relations. And when these type of things occur, it really hinders that process. A lot of these issues are really before my time in this position. It's unfortunate that they did or didn't occur. But my intention was to fix a lot of these things, and that's what the sheriff has directed me to do. So I'm a little bit disappointed that this is the way we started out, because I really wanted to work with you guys, and I really wanted to assist you guys in making the department better. So I hope we can move forward in a better light than that, because I've heard things from the citizens in my few times here. I will respond to one thing. We have done the inquiry into the harassment allegations, and it's in the final approval processes, which is going to be done per policy, which will mean we'll give you an official response in writing, and the OIG will be able to review that just like anything else. We have been compliant for the most part with the county code. There is some dispute there on some things, and I would say that we could prove that, but I really need to talk to counsel if we're going to be accused of not following the law.
Could you answer create a policy that is then what people know about, understand, can access it, and follow.
Right. So policies are created for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes we create policy after we find that something occurs and there's a risk management issue or there's a training issue or we're doing something that we could do better. We have a training staff, we have a field operations staff, and they're constantly either reviewing policies for updates. Sometimes the law will dictate what policy changes, and then we'll evaluate that. So in the example that you've requested, and I've talked to you now, this will be the third time on the deadly use of force policy. Our policy changes were triggered because the law changed. And so our staff of experts examine the law, they look at the case laws if there are any, they look at the requirements of the new law, they look at our training procedures that are currently in place, they make the recommendations, and then it goes through county council for review, and then it goes to management for approval. So depending on the policy, some of it could be involved with training, some of it could be involved like with the body camera situation that's probably going to come up here. That's a whole new policy, but it's also based on the law. And so there's multiple aspects to this, and we have a cadre of experts within the department, depending on where this goes through, but it will go all the way through from training to establishment of the policies, through our risk management bureaus, all the way through for legal opinion through county council, and then up to the management approval process. It's unfortunately quite lengthy because we have to make sure that we get it right because we're an industry leader in law enforcement. Other departments look to us for our policy and procedures as a guideline for them.
And is there a written policy about what Mr. Huntsman was referring to in terms of Sheriff Villanueva saying there shall not be, or I don't know what the wording would be in the written document, but that there secret societies where other rights, people's rights are violated, will not be tolerated. Now, I don't have the exact words, and we haven't seen exact words written down anywhere. Does that exist as a written document? And if not, is it going to exist as a written document as a firm policy?
The written document exists. I've seen that. I can't answer to what he saw online as far as whether it's there or not. But the policy was written as the sheriff said it was.
So can you get that to us?
Sure.
Thank you. Commissioner Bonner?
Let me just follow up on that, to your point, because if the sheriff says something, that doesn't make it policy. Which you have to go through a process in which it's actually adopted as part of the policy of the sheriff's department in its manual. So if the sheriff says something that there's a ban on deputy police, that's a good thing, by the way. I applaud that. I'm glad he did that. But it's meaningless unless it's adopted in policy and written policy. And the reason is that if a deputy sheriff violates what the sheriff said is his policy, there's no disciplinary consequence for it unless it is policy. So if you don't have a disciplinary consequence, then you don't have an effective rule or policy for the department. So that's really what we're talking about here. So if there is a policy, we'd like to see it. If there isn't, I would urge the sheriff, if you could take that back to Sheriff Villanueva, to adopt such a policy as promptly as possible. So I guess that isn't a question, but I did have a question, and that is,
Can I respond to that real
oh
quick?
yes, of course.
So my partner here, because he has the responsibility, so he believes that policy is meet and confer with the unions. That's one of the things that I left out, that all of our policies do affect our unions. And so because of the process that we have, that part of the process has to occur. And so the sheriff's intention to have the policy is moving forward if in fact that's where it's at. So I'm not disputing what you're saying, but that might give you a little more clarity as to what this delay. I told you a lot of the policy takes time to get through the whole process.
Yep.
I'm not giving any excuse, I'm just telling you.
No, I understand, and I understand it's part of the process under the collective bargaining agreement. We just urge that be moved forward, and if that is that's what's holding it up. At least we'd like to know, I mean, what the status of the policy is. So that's what I realize that you're saying that's probably
No,
what's
he's
holding it up.
saying it's exactly
Okay,
where
that
it's
is,
at.
okay, so that's where it is right now, and that process hopefully will move forward, and that would be certainly, I think, my hope, and I think it's shared by my fellow commissioners that as promptly as possible, that a policy that made clear that secret deputy police and subgroups is something that will not be tolerated within the sheriff's department, be adopted as soon as possible. Now, okay, so the question I had though, the Inspector General raised an issue with respect to the PRMS files, and I'll ask both him and you, if I could, as a representative of the sheriff, but he is saying essentially that there are, within the PRMS file system, there's a subset of what he characterized as secret files, I think accessible only to internal affairs. And I'm just trying to get at, if I can ask this question, and you can answer, do your best, and if you can't, you can get back to us. But one, is there a set of files that is not accessible by the Inspector General, even at the request of the Civilian Oversight Commission? And why is that? I mean, why is there a secret set of files that are so sensitive that apparently the Inspector General was not allowed to see them, even with a memorandum of understanding? Can you speak to that? And then let me ask Mr. Huntsman.
I will, and then if I can't, I'll have my partner do it. So this has been a long, ongoing thing, request from the OIG that it goes past Sheriff being away of it. So the answer is simply is yes, there is files that are masked to internal affairs only. Files that I myself can't even see. I have the same access as Mr. Huntsman does. I have what they call executive access, which means I can see everything within the department other than those very select files. The criteria for those files is the discretion of the professional standards chief who's sitting next to me. And the reason why is that there's some files in there that they're either ongoing investigations or stuff that have been deemed sensitive, that people with the type of access that I have should not be seeing them. So for example, if I myself was under investigation, we wouldn't want me to be able to see those files. So if a chief was under investigation, we wouldn't want him to be able to access his files. So to give you an example of the legitimacy, they're not secret, they are logged within the system, they're not ghost files or anything, they actually have a number to them, and they're just merely masks so that we can control the access of who actually sees them. I was talking to my partner here, and I think I could work towards a possible resolution to that now that we're the ones in charge. But we have to look at the issue, so I'm not going to promise anything, but I do think this issue could be worked out. And with both of our backgrounds and working in internal affairs, I just think we could take a look at this and figure something out. That's what I was talking about when I first started talking, that it's our intention to try to work with you guys and try to do the right things. And it's just unfortunate that all this is thrown up and I'm being asked to answer for the whole past year when I'm ready to move forward and work on issues and get solutions, not go backwards and point fingers.
Well, we also want to move forward. I just want to say that my concern is, and it's not just the PRMS subset system, I appreciate that explanation, but the overall concern that I think the Inspector General is raising is that there's just been a whole lot of stonewalling of the Inspector General in terms of his being able to access information and data that is important for him to perform his role. But more importantly, I mean, the Civilian Oversight Commission, this commission that's sitting right here, I mean, is unable to do its oversight function unless we have some reliable way of getting data and information. And most of that is going to be primarily through and from the Sheriff's Department. So if we're going to conduct meaningful exercise, meaningful oversight, we have to have access to that information, and that mainly is going to be through the Inspector General. And that leads me to the question of the memorandum of understanding. The Inspector General says that essentially has been repudiated by the sheriff, the new sheriff, and you're saying that's news to you. I actually think we need to revisit the memorandum of understanding, because there has to be some understandable and agreed upon way of for the General, particularly acting on behalf of the Civilian Oversight Commission, to access information and data that is essential for us to perform our oversight role with respect to deputy cliques, with respect to inappropriate use of force, or out of policy use of force by the Sheriff's Department, whether the discipline system actually is working or is in shambles, quote unquote. So we actually have to, we must have this. We have to come to some sort of we have to have some sort of a method to gather this information, and certainly one of the best ways would be to have a memorandum of understanding that also it does include and involve the Civilian Oversight Commission. So I just lay that on the table for your comment and frankly for any comment Mr. Huntsman might have.
I do have a comment. Mr. Gross says that he cannot answer any questions regarding 832.7's requirement that video critical incidents, including those involving shooting people, be made public. And if it is not made public, that written reasons and the date that it will be made public be provided in response to PRAs, of which there have been numerous ones, but as a general rule. And the fact that I mentioned that that is the law, which the sheriff has talked publicly about the fact that we're not in compliance with the PRA laws regarding discipline, as they have been changed this year at 832.7, but also as to video. And Commander Marks is going to talk today about body cameras, and a piece of the body camera policy includes the release of video, and how it dovetails or doesn't with the current law of 832.7 is an important issue. I am merely observing what the law is and what other people have, including the Sheriff's Department, have acknowledged, that they're out of compliance with that law, and as a result, Mr. Gross is offended and must consult counsel. Well, let's dial back a bit. On these secret files that we talked about, they were a snapshot of them was given to me in the end of last year, and as a result, I'm under criminal investigation. I shouldn't be talking to you. I should only be having my lawyer talk to you. When at this chair, my defense lawyer should be here to tell you, well, if Mr. Huntsman was given immunity, what he would tell you is, blah, blah, blah. Have I done that? Ask me, have I been quieter since I was threatened in June that if I actually issued the Mandoyan report, that there would be consequences, and when I was subsequently placed under criminal investigation? Have I cowered in the corner? I have not, nor will I. And you won't be hearing from my lawyer, you'll be hearing from me. And that's under criminal, a threat of criminal prosecution, not a mere observation of what the sheriff has already publicly discussed, a failure to comply with transparency laws. So I think we should place that comment in context. As to the proposal from Mr. Gross that perhaps we could be given access to the secret files, I think that's a good idea. As to the idea of a memorandum of understanding, it's a memorandum of agreement, the one that we had. I actually did send them a letter, if Mr. Gross had read it. It said you abrogated this agreement back in December when you didn't respond in 10 days as required by the document. So it's not like it's a big surprise, or should be. The fact that I'm under criminal investigation, he's aware of, I think. So, you know, it's not like he just came to the party today and has no idea what's happening and is shocked. This has been going on for quite some time. We actually don't need a memorandum of agreement because on Tuesday, the board's going to vote on a new ordinance that is very specific, very clear, and requires complete access from my office and gives you subpoena power. And so at that time, once it passes, and I think there's a second reading, assuming that the board chooses that, then we will go back to the department and say, you know, we have a new ordinance that makes it a little clearer that you have to give us these things. Please do. And if they say no, then I'll come to you and ask for a subpoena, and we'll start a litigation process to find out whether or not indeed HIPAA prevents us from looking at the department's hiring, whether or not we can actually look at the process, the things they do within it. And I think at that time we will conclude that the law, much like pitches, sobriety, or any other law, simply needs to be followed. I'm happy to have a memorandum of agreement, but I think you'll find the new law is very clear, and we don't really need one. They just need to comply with it. So thank you.
I also want to get back to just quickly regarding the timeliness of a policy being created through the legitimate processes that you have in the department regarding the deputy cliques. This was an issue that this body started to deal with the prior sheriff. So now we're talking 3 years of it being a major, major concern to the public, not only to this body, and hopefully to the department. So I just have to reiterate how our concern is not going away. And I would like to have, I don't know if I can request an update, a monthly update at our meetings about where this policy is with the unions, with the department. When are we going to see it? Will we have any input in it? Will we be able to have a preview to see what it contains on behalf of the community? So I just think it's important to see how important and critical the issue of the deputy clerks is to Los Angeles, to the county and the people of Los Angeles. Yes. Is that what I just said? Okay.
Mr. Huntsman, you showed that there's that the email is dated January 3rd, but it doesn't have the year.
Which email are you referring to, sir?
The claim Villanueva put an end to discipline investigations of dozens of deputies.
That's this year. In December 30th, the Times ran an editorial that said...
So it's 2020?
The sheriff's tweets are beginning in 2020.
Oh, okay, thank you. Excuse me.
I have, thank you. I have a couple of inquiries. First off, Assistant Sheriff Gross, I think that your posture of wanting to work with the commission, build transparency, build trust is admirable. However, I think that one doesn't build trust and transparency by saying, I don't want to talk about the past. I understand you were not assistant sheriff during the past year, but the fact is, everybody knows that past history does make a difference. Past arguments do make a difference. That's how we learn not to recreate problems in the past when we move forward. So I think that it is, it's really counterproductive to say, and perhaps I'm not paraphrasing your comments well, but it's not productive to say that, I don't want to talk about the past, I want to move forward. So I think that mindset, if I could request, needs to be changed and reconsidered.
Well, with all respect, as far as productivity, if I'm coming in here and you're handing me issues that were from people that were in command above me than when I wasn't in the position, and I'm telling you that if you brought the issues to me now, we'll look at each one of them and we'll work on them. I'm not telling you that we won't deal with the past. What I'm telling you is it's hard to answer to that when it's being wrapped up and alleged that it's all in violation of the county code.
Your past is the present
Well,
and the future.
If I could continue, you'll have an opportunity during public comment. I understand what you're saying, but I am suggesting certainly what Mr. Huntsman has detailed has been during the course of Sheriff Villanueva's tenure, whether you were in a different position until recently, that really belies the point. And I think that one wants, as I said, learn from your past mistakes and move forward to create something different. And that's really what our role here is in this commission. So with that, I have a rather broad question to Mr. Huntsman, and that is, I'm very troubled, as I'm sure other commissioners are troubled, by the evidence, as you called it, that you have set forth in front of us. We have certainly heard much of this before, but to see it all in one presentation is shocking, to say the least. What I would ask you is, considering what you have endured during the past year, and certainly The commission has made requests for documents or policy, and with very little exception during the past year, we've received basically nothing. Or what we have received has not been responsive to our requests. So my question to Mr. Huntsman is, how do you want this to end? And what do you see as a way of resolving this issue so that we can all move forward?
The current ordinance says very clearly that the OIG is supposed to have complete access to the Sheriff's Department. It is not and has not been complied with. I would like that to end today. I do not expect it to happen, although I take Mr. Gross's word that he would like to go forward and change what happens now and can't speak to the past. I understand your point, but that would be fine today. The department could give us complete access. I could walk down and look at hiring packets. My staff could. We could actually go down to IA and see where they're at on investigations, monitor progress investigations as the law permits us to. I would hope that the threat of a criminal investigation of my office for looking at documents which we're hearing, oh yeah, we'd like to actually now get you to look at, and which we formally asked for, would end. This body sent a letter to the Sheriff's Department saying, you know, it's a conflict for you to investigate the folks who are in charge of assisting the board to supervise you, and you ought to bring in some other agency. And Mr. Murakami sent a letter back saying, you know, as soon as we're ready, we will absolutely hand it off, and yet they haven't. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark. And that threat, which continues, that began June of last year, from the sheriff's own lips to me, continues to this day. It is a violation of the penal code, and he should have a lawyer, not Mr. Gross. That should end. Or it should be handed off to an agency that doesn't have a conflict, the AG, the DA, the U.S. Attorney, and somebody, but not the Sheriff's Department that has a clear conflict. That's crazy. What I would like to have happen, if none of that happens, is on Tuesday I'd like the board to give you subpoena power and me full access in more extreme terms that are clear to everybody. Yes, it really means it. It's not negotiable. It's not whatever. This is serious business. Then we all need to think long and hard about, if the Sheriff's Department then doesn't comply, which I wish they would, but I don't really expect it, what test case we want. Which instance of a request, and you've made a lot of requests that you haven't gotten back. I've made a lot of requests we haven't gotten. We pick the one that we think we really want to, kind of encapsulates the outrage of the public, the secret society problem, the lack of transparency, and whether or not a quasi-military group has to have civilian oversight, or if they just get to decide what the law is and have nobody question it. Those things all wrapped up in one. You issue that subpoena, and then we go to court. And a judge tells us who's way off the beaten path here. I may be wrong about all this. We may have no right to know what the Sheriff's Department is doing. The public may have no right to that. I don't think that's the case. The sheriff won't let us do what the law provides for, so we have to go to court and litigate it. Again, unless they change their mind. Given what's happened in the Mandoya litigation, I don't expect that. But what I want to be is after that. I think if a judge says, no, the law is clear, the law is this, this, and this, and you have to comply with it, Sheriff, you're not above the law. If that happens, then I believe the sheriff will comply. And I think that is probably what is necessary. But we could stop right now with that process in the same way that Mandoya didn't have to go on all this time. And so I just want that compliance with the law. But I really think we're going to need a court order for it to happen.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Commissioner Kennedy?
Well, we have been in existence right now over 3 years, and over at our meetings, the LSAD, the Sheriff's Department sends representatives who really prize secrecy, and they claim that the confidentiality or the secrecy is necessary to protect the integrity of criminal investigations. But I think that we've seen today, and this is not the first time, upon reflection and impartial analysis, the real reason for the claimed secrecy is self-protection or a reflexive resistance to civilian oversight. And the COC cannot fulfill its mission if we continue to accept illegitimate claims of secrecy and confidentiality. And I think we have to do something to stand up for our Inspector General, because what we've heard today is, it just clarifies what we have heard over and over again, that the request for information will be stonewalled and will not be given. And I just don't understand how this group can politely accept that, because we cannot, we do nothing but oversight theater if we don't have the information necessary to assess the situation. And at this point, we have a laundry list of issues that remain unaddressed, and the list grows longer and longer, and the time frames for addressing it grow longer and longer, and we do nothing. I don't know what we should do, but I hope that subpoena power will be the answer. It's just disheartening to hear the comments of the Inspector General today.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Let's turn to public comment, and Ms. Williams will call the names.
Greg Allen,
Followed by Jacqueline Ventures, followed by Cynthia Anderson Barker.
Good morning. I meant to mention I was wearing blue to support my men in blue. And I trust everybody wearing blue here today is doing the same thing. So I am disappointed to hear how uncooperative our sheriff is being with the COC. It just means you're trying to protect somebody who has something to be protected. And that's not the role of a sheriff. The sheriff is supposed to let the chips fall where they may if somebody did something wrong. Give that information to the COC when they ask for it. I personally heard your comments, Mr. Gross. I'm bewildered why you're here, because I don't see you being cooperative even in a little bit. Mr. Chief Burson, I don't think you should bring Mr. Gross here again. His comments and attitude don't reflect a cooperative feeling for me. And anything, it just basically says, I'm not going to cooperate. And I believe the only drawback is to subpoena your stuff. And I wish you'd just get out of the way. You're supposed to let the chips fall where they may. Let what people did wrong show up so we can correct it. Questions I wanted to know about is these 8 sheriffs that were beaten up by these banditos. I want all those sheriffs interviewed. I want them pointing fingers at people, and I want it handled. And I want a written report back to tell me what you did and what's going on. Next month, I give you 30 days. Do something for me, please. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Jacqueline Ventures, followed by Cynthia Anderson Barker.
Good morning, Jacqueline Ventures. I want to thank you, first of all, Mr. Huntsman, for your deliverance of your what you were doing. Tanel Phillips is my son that was shot April 4th, 2011 by Deputy Gonzalo Azusa. I don't know if you guys know, but this LA Times and KPCC filed a lawsuit with Supreme Court to disclose the investigators' the deputies' files, and it was because of this, my son right here, There was a shot by this deputy, and a gun was turned in 2 days later to cover up his wrongdoing. This deputy shot 4 people within a 7-month period that year, and nothing has happened. I have a file here where I've been writing letters to everybody because under duress he was forced to take a deal because of the torture that he was receiving in the county jail by these deputy gangs that do exist. This deputy is part of a jump out. They call it the jump out boys. This have to stop. This year my son, February, because of these false allegations from this deputy, he's been tortured in prison. You know, I'm still fighting right now today to get him out of there. If this gun that this deputy had planted on him, if they told me if I get it off, he could come home. I don't have $40,000 to cover up somebody's wrongdoing because this deputy should have been charged with attempted murder, shooting an unarmed person 5 times in the back and on desk duty. They don't know my relationship with the sheriff department. I sit on a commission. I have family that's in law enforcement and friends, and they have been guiding me. The law enforcement have been guiding me through this process, but every time I get close, the door is closed because it's a cover-up. These things need to stop.
Our final speaker, Cynthia Anderson Barker.
My name again, Cynthia Anderson Barker. I'm an attorney. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I'm affiliated with the National Lawyers Guild. First of all, I want to thank the comment that was made that Max's presentation was absolutely shocking. The litany of evidence that he's assembled is really commendable, and I thank you, Max, for that. But I am a little bit dismayed with this body, and I'm going to be very honest with you. When this body was created, I was very cynical about how effective you could be or will be. Well, now you may have subpoena power granted, which is great. But Max, I think this presentation that you made today should be made to the full Board of Supervisors. The board has the power of the purse. How are we going to control the Sheriff's Department except through that, or except through the community's recall campaign, which we are going to begin? We have to be effective. You don't have power. Maybe that subpoena power will get somewhere, but we need to go forward with our recall campaign. Thank you.
Is that it? So, the issue between, the relationship between the OIG and the Sheriff's Department is absolutely critical to the work that the OIG is mandated to do and to the work that the COC has to do in terms of our oversight. I talked about at our meeting in December that there were 4 pillars that allow the COC to be effective. It's the COC itself, how we conduct our business, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, how they engage, comply when necessary, and commit to transparency and communication, the Office of the Inspector General, of course, with their mandates and the very specific obligations, but also rights to have access within the confidentiality, which we would all respect, but we need to have somebody who has eyes on the prize, and that is the OIG. And the 4th, of course, is the community paying attention, engaging, bringing their issues and stories, and again, paying attention. So those 4 have to interface, and in a ideal world, it would be happening with a lot of energy, openness, forthcoming, and willingness to kind of overcome the obstacles, to solve the problems that are there. So we're going to continue this, hopefully to strengthen all 4 pillars of oversight, which is an important part of integrity. And now we're going to move to another report back from the OIG clearly the Office of Inspector General is critical to the functioning of our county. And this has to do with the allegations of harassment of families impacted by officer-involved shootings by LASD patrol. And we asked the OIG to come back with some information, as much information as they can glean. We had our own motion, and also asked LASD to initiate a formal inquiry on this assessment, because certainly the allegations are very concerning. So let's move to invite Inspector General back.
The harassment allegations, which, as I say, are related to the secret society issue because a portion of them come out of East LA, although I would say, at this point, and this is why I say that this problem has to be resolved. I hope that the sheriff's policy goes into effect soon. I hope that it is enthusiastically enforced, and I hope it is embraced by the deputies' union. As I've said in the past, no deputy had a choice about whether or not to be part of this structure. These societies have existed for 50 years, and all the deputies who are employed today joined an organization that already had them. It's a management problem that needs to be addressed. It's the failure to investigate them through internal affairs investigations, and I cannot provide you the evidence that supports that. But I said at the last meeting that I wasn't getting access, and the sheriff's department said I was. I presented you the evidence. Trust me on this. If I presented you the evidence of there's an ongoing process. Many of those those little W's, many of those are closed. Their investigation is complete. They're still working on one having to do with an arrest for a marijuana cigarette. And that I think is actually a really important one because it relates to this point. That I don't think, from what we've learned so far, that this is a problem of deputies harassing the public. I think what it is a problem of is the sheriff's department not communicating to deputies what the ground rules are and what they should or shouldn't do. So we have these memorials, and Supervisor Solis has called more than once for a policy from the sheriff's department that would protect people's right to grieve around incidents in which their loved one has been shot. I realize from the sheriff's department's point of view that person may have been a criminal who threatened a deputy's life, and that may be absolutely true, and they had to be shot. But regardless of whether that is true, because those investigations are never complete 15 minutes later, you can't expect the family of a person who has died to wholeheartedly embrace that concept. And if the person was shot in a high crime area where maybe there's gang involvement, you can't expect that those people will look like the PTA over in some fancy suburb. The LA is what it is. And we have to come to an approach where we can treat all people with respect. That is what the Family Assistance Program is about, is trying to reach through that. And likewise, the Sheriff's Department needs, as a department, to come up with a way to let people grieve without it becoming an us versus them battle. So that this law enforcement becomes what it should always be, which is a neutral arbiter. And maybe an individual did a thing, and maybe it was good, maybe it was bad, but that department is trustworthy and reliable. And yet there are people who feel that when a large group of squad cars roll up to a memorial, and then somebody gets arrested for smoking a marijuana cigarette, which is something that is an infraction now in public, and somebody else gets arrested for obstructing justice because the person handed them the cigarette, yeah, it needs to be investigated by the Sheriff's Department as to whether or not that deputy followed policy. But I don't think that deputy acted in a vacuum. Either there were briefings at the station before where they talked about this family event and how we need to be careful and how we have to protect the rest of the public if it gets unruly or if people can't drive by or whatever, but we need to do it in a way that reaches out and says, well, let's work together to keep this under control. And kind of the way this group has done town hall meetings after shootings and done outreach to try to get people resolving these things in a non-violent way that can allow everybody respect. And that needs to be a department effort, not an individual deputy who rolls up and makes a call whether or not to arrest somebody for marijuana cigarette. There's no policy at the department on this. I've been able to detect no action within management to deal with this problem. It appears that it's been dumped entirely upon the deputies. And so, yeah, if you're pulling out a station where a bunch of people may be banditos, then maybe you get a bandito version of it. If you get a deputy who's a good guy just trying to make things work, then maybe he goes out of his way, or she, to negotiate and to communicate, and maybe it goes well. But it's entirely, at the moment, appears to be on the deputies with no guidance, no support from above. I may be wrong. It may be, as you can see, our access issues are not great, so maybe I'm just not hearing it, and maybe I'm missing it. I hope that's the case, but because that's what needs to happen. This department needs to take ownership of that and not just leave it to frontier justice of deputies whose friends and coworkers have been involved in a violent altercation, and therefore may have an opinion about it, may feel strongly about it, may be angry in the same way that the family's angry. Not the same, but the anger is powerful on both sides. So it's important that somebody step in and do that. We've looked at the WCSCRs, some combination of those letters, and we're not done looking at them, and the whole analysis isn't complete. The way it appeared to me was there was a bunch of individual cases, most of them are done and one of them is outstanding, but maybe there's going to be a larger analysis done by the department. I hope that's the case. Some of the individual ones, for the most part, investigations seem to have been done in good faith, but there is a troubling, in a couple instances, failure to collect apparent video evidence. Incidents that happened at 7-Eleven, so there's presumably surveillance tape and no effort made to collect that surveillance tape. We're going to talk about body cameras, the importance of audio tape in the Mandoyan case. I won't shut up about the existence of videotape and audio tape. That's from my prosecutor days. If you actually have recorded evidence of something, that makes a big difference. You can tell a lot about what happened. You can't tell everything, but it really helps you kind of figure out who's talking appropriately. We have other concerns about some of those WCSCRs, and I don't want to go into them yet because I don't know what the department's going to do. They may walk back some of them. They may look at them and say, well, that concluded that the conduct was perfect, but we look at the facts that have been found to be true by the decider, and it's not perfect, so conduct could have been better. They may alter some of them, I don't know, but currently there are a few concerns. But again, not horrible ones. It does look like on an individual basis the department has looked at some of those complaints. But again, I think the responsibility is larger. It's much like the change in the shooting standard. That came about because of an outrage in the legislature and the public, because some police departments ignored the California Supreme Court's rulings regarding the totality of the circumstances and how all of that had to be done to de-escalate and control things. This department never incorporated those rules into its analysis of force incidents when they should have. Not in order to penalize a deputy who has to make a call when they actually apply force, but for the department to evaluate itself. Is it doing everything it can to not put a deputy in that situation, not to put the public in that situation? And that's the correct standard. And that has to be the way they address this same problem here. Otherwise, it will continue to exist. Body cameras will lessen it, because in the future, if that goes forward, and I hope it will, we're going to hear from the department Commander Marks about his valiant efforts to make this move forward. And again, my recommendation is that you give it a stamp of approval and encourage the board to fund it, despite problems with the policy. That'll give us more evidence, and it may lift things up. But at the end of the day, if the department is not taking management responsibility and leaving it to the deputies, then we're going to have a continued problem. So that's kind of where we're at this time. We got a not full response to the things we requested. If I'm reading correctly, the department is not conducting a thorough and comprehensive analysis of the problem, but maybe that will change. As Mr. Gross says, it's the future that matters most, although you're correct that the past sometimes informs us, but I'm trying not to be cynical. That analysis, I think, could happen, and I hope it does. And I hope those individual investigations with little pieces are put together. There's another problem, which is there's a lack of trust in members of the public who are in this situation. We always talk about the community, and we talk about the public. And the public is very big, and the community usually means, sort of geographic area or people with a common sort of perception of things. But in this case, we have actual family members of people who have died at the hands of law enforcement, and so they have a, built-in reason not to be comfortable with the just the facts man, Joe Friday aggressive approach, especially when it's done in an aggressive way. So I think there's a unique problem here that I would love in the future for the Office of Inspector General to be able to assist the department with reaching out to these people, gathering information from them so that they can look at it in a way that is not aggressive and confrontational, because as we saw from our assistant sheriff, people don't like being told maybe that they're not perfect, and so they lawyer up real quick or whatever. We need to have an exchange of information. We need to have communication, not something inflicted upon people. And so I would love to help with that. My staff would love to help with that. Under our current ordinance, we don't have any authority to do that. Under the change in the ordinance, we will have more authority, but I still want the department to start taking ownership of this issue rather than treating it as a spot problem of whether or not deputies misbehaved. Not to say that that isn't an important part of it, but at the end of the day, it's a community policing issue, really. It's an outreach issue. Are we supervising ourselves so that we can reach out to people? And yeah, when a person is shot and there's law enforcement action, it's one of the hardest challenges. So I don't fault the deputies for having trouble with it. I just say this is something that the department and this body need to put a lot of effort into to try to make this right for all parties concerned, so that it isn't, something that we keep coming back to and back to. So we're partway through. I hope that we can get a positive outcome at the end, but we got a lot of focus, so I hope that you'll bring this back up again in the future.
Thank you for that report. And I realize there are limitations to how complete it is, but it occurs to me that this is an area, the treatment of families, relatives of individuals who have been involved in lethal force situations where this oversight commission could play a valuable role. And by that I mean for the commission itself, through perhaps one of its ad hoc committees, and I'm actually thinking possibly this is the Family Assistance Ad hoc Committee, could take a look at this issue, make some determinations of some things that the Inspector General really hasn't told us, which is, has this occurred? Has harassment occurred? How widespread is it? What are the reasons for it if it has occurred on a, if it occurs on a more or less regular basis? And what are the recommendations, including policy recommendations, we might make to the sheriff here? So I don't know if I need to make this a formal motion, but I just submit to the chair, co-chair, the possibility that this actually is an issue that would lend itself to the Civilian Oversight Commission for a deep dive through one of our ad hoc committees.
I'd like to turn the mic over to Assistant Sheriff Cross.
Well, I was here when you officially asked me to open the inquiries, and I did as you asked. And they're nearing completion, but I don't have the speculation that Max does on what those results will be. I'm going to review it all, make sure that the investigation was done correctly and the facts lead wherever they go. I would state again that we do not condone harassment of anybody. If anybody harassed anybody, that it will be dealt with on an administrative level or any level that's appropriate. But we're going to look at the facts, and then we're going to present them to you, and it's as simple as that. And you're going to be in very short order. We did exactly what you asked.
And the short order is, any idea when that might be?
I'll have them done before the next meeting.
February? I have a question, particularly around, there's some specificity, as Mr. Huntsman was alluding to, and also Commissioner Bonner, some specificity around the complaints that we have received from these family members, and it did have, some of it did have to do with these memorials and gathering, on the sidewalk or near where, you know, the person that was deceased. And so I have a question. In terms of the briefing and the things that go on in the station, when you know something like that is gonna happen, or you, deputies or the captains observe, is there any kind of preparation to take into account the fact that these are legitimate community, spiritual, cultural gatherings that people do? It's kind of a thing. I mean, you see the flowers, the candles. It's an important ritual that, unfortunately, too many of them happen. But it is a fact of our community cultures. So, is there any discussion about how to allow respect going on? And obviously, your department always has to be at the ready if things get out of hand or get too dangerous. So is there any training around that? Any just conversation at all? So that, as Mr. Huntsman is saying, so that the deputies can have some kind of guidance, maybe some leeway, some respectful interaction and understanding about what's happening.
Well, it's always a tragedy when anyone loses their life. And when some of these memorials have occurred in the past, unfortunately there's been violence there, and there's been retaliations and different types of incidents that occur. So we do monitor them to make sure we keep the public safe. And so we do have briefings beforehand to make sure that we give the family the proper space to grieve, and we don't try to interfere in any way. But we want to make sure that there's no harm to anybody. We want to keep the community safe. So the briefings would be along those lines.
Ryan Twining.
Commissioner
Yes, thank you, Assistant Sheriff Gross. As you know, we have continued to hear from family members who talk about their experiences being harassed by sheriff's deputies as they're gathering and as they're grieving. Some months ago, when this was initially raised, I believe that Under Sheriff Murakami said to us, and again, I'm talking about the past, but that the Sheriff's Department has not received any complaints, and so therefore there was nothing for him to investigate. So at this point, I am heartened by the fact that it seems that the Sheriff's Department is taking some steps at looking at these issues seriously. But I don't hear anything aside from briefings about a written policy. Because as has been previously said, unless there is a written policy, there is really no force behind information that is communicated. And certainly none of us wants any of this to fall to the individual deputy. This needs to be a department-wide policy. Then it has the force of, quote, law within the department, and violation of that would subject a deputy to discipline. So is there a written policy on this issue?
I don't believe there's a written policy specifically on memorials. There's written policy on how we handle large gatherings and other large meetings in public, or even where there's large groups that we do protest, stuff like that. So the response from our department, again, is to always allow everyone to express their rights, that they have to be in public. I would tell you that I'm not sure what Mr. Murakami spoke about, but in this particular incident, to circle back to that, we took everything that we were given. The allegations were very specific, and we used that as part of our inquiry. So in this particular case, there was complaints, and we took the information.
Would you make your policy available to this commission on how the department responds to large gatherings? And I say that because it may be that there needs to be a new policy specifically dealing with this issue. Because what happens in large protest and demonstration groups is not quite the same. So my request for the commission would be for you to make that available to the commission.
And as we stated before, ma'am, all of our policies are available to the public. All of our policies are online, so they're available to anyone who wants to look at them.
So that's how the commission should move forward in terms of seeing this policy.
No, as far as your specific request, we'll definitely honor that. I'm just saying that our policies are out there for anyone to look at any time, as I'm saying, in addition to what you're saying.
Thank you.
We would appreciate it if you could send it to us. And so it reminds me a little bit of, when you, as a kid, and you ask a parent, what does such and such mean? And they say, go look it up. And you might or might not look it up. So it would be helpful if you could get that to us. You don't have to just go and look it up. Yes. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that there were briefings before these gatherings of community and memorials. Is there guidance given to the watch commander or captain as to what's covered